Hello and welcome to the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. I'm Jeff Paur, senior writer for RealTime Fantasy Sports. And on today's show, we're going to give you our starts, sits, and sleepers for week 4 of the NFL season. We do this every week. And Logan Glaser is so kind to join me, and he's doing it again this week. He's going to help me go over all these starts, sits, and sleepers. So, Logan, thanks so much for joining me on the show again. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jeff. Excited for week 4.
Yeah, a couple things, though, before we get to the games. Just a reminder, there is a London game this week. So we're playing bright and early. Have those lineups set if you have any Vikings or Saints. So it's a real early game. And then I don't think it's really going to affect things lineup-wise, but keep an eye on that Tampa situation as well. I guess the latest is they really want to keep it there. The mayor's lobbying for it in Tampa Bay. So at this point, I think it's going to stay there and everything's going to be pretty normal. Is that what you're seeing as well, Logan?
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing as well. Hopefully everyone's staying safe that lives over in the East Coast in Florida. And and for the London game, I'm excited for that. I really like waking up Sunday morning to kick off football bright and early. So
I
excited
agree.
to have a game over there.
I mean, it's football all day then. The more football, the better, in my opinion.
Exactly.
You got a 9 a.m. game, noon, 3, and then the night game, a 7 o'clock game at night as well. So
For sure.
football all day. Nothing wrong with that. All right, Logan, let's get to these start, sits, and sleepers for this week. Now, we'll start with the QB position. Who do you have as a start at QB?
Yeah, start is probably a new TikTok star, and that's Russell Wilson. So he's going up against Las Vegas. And the reason why I'm having Russell Wilson as my start this week is Las Vegas defense has been awful. So they've allowed 24 plus points in all 3 games so far. Their defense has looked terrible and has made other starting quarterbacks just look amazing. And Russell Wilson has the quality and the upside to be that. He's gotten off to that rough start, as we kind of mentioned. He only has 37 points through 3 weeks, but I like him to bounce back in this matchup against Las Vegas.
All right, my start is Aaron Rodgers. So we're going with 2 veterans here. I like Aaron Rodgers. He's starting to heat up, multiple touchdowns, 2 straight games. I think he's getting on the same page with his receivers as well, especially Romeo Doubs. Very exciting for me to see him getting heavily involved in that passing game like he was last week. And also, he's played really good defense to start the season, played a good Bucs defense last week. It gets easier this week. He plays New England. They allow the 7th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. New England's also allowed 6 passing touchdowns this season. So I think maybe Rodgers has his best fantasy game to date in week 4. All right, Logan, how about a sit at the QB position?
Yeah, I'm going to be sitting Kirk Cousins in that London game. So they're going to be playing against New Orleans. I think this is going to be a really low-scoring game, personally. I do think Minnesota does come out with this win. Jameis Winston is a little banged up. We don't know if he's going to be starting yet. It might be Andy Dalton. But with New Orleans, both sides of this ball, it's pretty low scoring, as you can look at their previous matchup. So Kirk Cousins is high on the year, is 19 points, and he's played some little iffy defenses, and now he's going to get his first real big test this upcoming week against New Orleans. So I expect a low scoring game there.
Yeah, Cousins is disappointing me. I have a lot of stock in him. I thought he'll be off to a quicker start. Unfortunately, not the case. All right, my sit is Matthew Stafford. He's another guy off to a slow start. He's yet to have a 300-yard game this season. He has fewer than 14 fantasy points 2 of 3 games, 1 or no scores 2 of 3 games as well. He actually has more interceptions than touchdowns for the season. It's a very good offense. They're just not getting it done right now, and they play good defense this week with San Francisco. They allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. First overall against the pass, allowed just 148.3 passing yards per game. So I don't like Stafford at all this week, and if you have better options, I would go with them. Now, Logan, let's move on to the ever-popular sleeper category. Who do you got as a sleeper at quarterback?
Yeah, my sleeper, I'm going to go with Jacoby Brissette. So he's playing at Atlanta. Absolutely love this matchup for him last week. He's got an extended rest as they had a Thursday game last week. We saw really good chemistry with him and Amari Cooper last week. That was the first real signs of life that we kind of saw from Cooper so far this year. It was a really good bounce back week for Brissette and Cooper. And we've also seen some flashes of Brissette being able to run the ball. So that makes that even more attractive to play him. So you got Brissette against Mariota. I expect some running going in that game between the quarterbacks. So yeah. I like him as my sleeper.
Brissett's definitely been a surprise to me, and so is this guy I'm going to mention as well. It's Geno Smith. He's my sleeper. He has at least 19 fantasy points, 2 of 3 games. He's making good decisions. He's getting a lot of chances to throw the ball because the Seahawks are having trouble running the ball. So they've been throwing a lot more, and Smith has been playing well. He has, like I said, 19 fantasy points, 2 of 3 games at least. They play Detroit this week. They allowed the third most fantasy points to quarterbacks and 31 points per game. So I think this will be a high-scoring game. And I think Geno Smith's a good streamer if you're looking for somebody, and somebody on DFS as well. If you're looking for a cheap option, I would consider Geno Smith. Let's move on to running back now. Logan, who do you have as your start at running back?
My start is going to be Khalil Herbert. They're playing at New York Giants. He actually led the NFL in rushing last week with that David Montgomery injury. It's looking like Montgomery is going to be out this week. It's still a little questionable, so make sure check those injury reports. But it's looking like Montgomery is going to be out, so I'm going to be starting Herbert. I think he kind of plugs into a top 15 overall running back role. As we mentioned, he led the NFL in rushing yards. New York Giants got absolutely crushed on the ground last week against Zeke and Pollard, so I expect that to continue with Herbert as he looked really well last week.
Yeah, I like Herbert as well. And my start is Javonte Williams. Again, I'm not going to go into the whole usage of him. I know everybody's baffled. I am. Mike Boone played last week. I don't understand what's going on there, but I think Williams gets more work this week. Melvin Gordon's banged up as well. He was limited in practice yesterday as a neck injury. So I think that bodes well for Williams this week. And he's been doing the job when he gets the touches. And if he has at least 16 touches per game, if he gets that much work this week against Las Vegas. You mentioned them for Russell Wilson. I like him more in the running game here, and I think Williams will post big numbers. Vegas has been terrible against the run this year. They allowed the third most fantasy points to running backs this year. So I'm sticking with Williams, and I'm sticking with him to have a big game this week. All right, how about a sit at running back, Logan?
Yeah, sitting, I'm going to be going with James Robinson. So he has been absolutely electric so far to start the season. A lot depends on what other options you have with your running backs. But I personally think he's going to have a more of a down week this week compared to his first 3 weeks. That's why I'm listing him as my sit. He's going up against Philadelphia at Philadelphia. They've been one of the best defenses in the league so far to start the season. I expect Philadelphia to win this game, and this is going to make the Jaguars want to pass the ball. So I expect ETN to get more involved as he's mainly been their pass catching back. So playing from behind does not suit James Robinson great. Playing with that lead is where you like that James Robinson to be at, and I expect him to be down against Philadelphia.
So my sit's the same as you. It's tough to sit a guy who's played really well to start the season, but I'm not big on Clyde Edwards-Helaire this week. He did score a touchdown last week, but he ran 7 times for no gain. The only thing that saved him was that touchdown. He did have 5 catches, but didn't gain many yards there as well. So I think he's a little bit of a concern this week. Another reason is because Jerick McKinnon actually has outsnapped him this year. I don't know if people realize that, but he has more snaps at running back than Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He hasn't got a ton of touches. He averages 11.3 touches per game. I don't like that against a very good Bucs defense, very good against the run. They allow the fewest fantasy points of running backs, and they've yet to allow a rushing touchdown this season as well. So, again, it's tough to sit him, but if you have better options, like Logan said with James Robinson, I would consider them this week, despite the good starts from both Edwards-Helaire and James Robinson. All right, let's move on to sleeper at running back. Logan, who do you got?
Yeah, I'm going with Tony Pollard as my sleeper. He's going up against Washington this week. Washington has allowed 22-plus points every single week so far this year through the first 3 weeks. Pollard is starting to look legit, and I mean he's starting to take over almost that running back one role in Dallas. He's not there yet, but I think he's slowly creeping up on it. We saw him almost rush for about 8 or 9 yards per rush last week. He broke off a 45-yard touchdown, and he just looks electric out of that backfield compared to the bigger Zeke. I think Dallas is going to go with using Zeke on like third and short goal line work and all of that as well. But I like Pollard out of that backfield, and he just provides so much electric out of that Dallas field.
Yeah, I like Pollard too. My sleeper is Craig Reynolds. He's set to be the top backup for the Lions now with DeAndre Swift hurt. Jamal Williams is going to start, but the backup for the Lions has played at least 33% of the snaps the first 3 games. So they get work. They like to rotate backs in there. And I think if he gets double-digit touches, which is likely against the Seahawks this week, I think that's good news. They allow the 6th most fantasy points to running backs, 31st overall against the run. So I think Reynolds could be a sneaky play if you're really looking for an option in deeper formats. I think he could do well this week against Seattle. All right, let's move on to receiver now, Logan. Who's your start at receiver in week 4?
Yeah, I'm going to be starting Brandon Cooks. So they're going to be going home a game against the Chargers. I really like the Texans actually to win this game. Chargers got absolutely destroyed last week against the Jaguars, 38-10. Bosa is now on the IR. J.C. Jackson's banged up, and this Herbert's also a little banged up. You got Keenan Allen who's banged up, and I really think with this hurt defense with the Chargers, Brandon Cooks is going to take advantage of that. He's looked solid so far through his first 3 games. He's Davis Mills' #1 option. And we saw last year when Texans were in close games, they relied big time on Brandon Cooks. So I expect him to go back to Brandon Cooks this week and look for that upset win against the Chargers.
All right, my start this week is one of the exciting rookies in this receiver class, Chris Olave. I know Jameis Winston's banged up. He's a little iffy. That worries me a little bit. But still, even if Dalton plays, I think Olave is going to get a lot of targets. Both Jarvis Landry, Michael Thomas, they're banged up as well. I think Landry's a better bet to play than Thomas at this point. Both those guys are questionable. Either way, Olave is going to get a lot of work. He has 13 targets each of his last 2 games. He had career high in receptions and yards last week. He's the top target in that offense right now. He's ahead of Michael Thomas, in my opinion. He's just a very talented player. I think he's going to keep his hot ways going this week against the Vikings. They allow 275.7 passing yards per game. So I'm keeping Olave in my lineup, and I think he'll do well over there in London. All right, a sit at receiver, Logan. What's your sit?
Yeah, I'm going to be saying Chase Claypool. So they're playing against the Jets, so I do like that matchup for Claypool. But he just has not had any games above 9 so far this year, and they Steelers have a terrible pass offense. It's one thing to go and get the second or third option for fantasy if you're on the Bills, so such as Gabriel Davis or Isaiah McKenzie. But when you're looking at the second or third option on one of the worst pass offenses in the NFL, I want to stay clear from them. It's okay to go with Deontay Johnson as the #1, but when you're starting to look in the second or third options, such as George Pickens and Chase Claypool, I do not want them starting in my lineup. So I'm going to be sitting Chase Claypool this week.
Yeah, Claypool's played a ton too. Just hasn't got the looks. I'm just really been surprised by his usage in that passing game. All right, my sit for this week is Jerry Jeudy. You talked about how you like Russell Wilson. I don't like Jeudy, though, at receiver for this week. He played last week, had a couple different injuries, though, and he didn't do much in that game. Caught 2 passes for 17 yards, played just 59% of the snaps, which was a season low for him. He had a big week 1, but hasn't done anything outside of that. Cortland Sutton's the guy dominating targets for Russell Wilson. Wilson seems to look his way very often. He's the guy in that lineup that I trust. I don't trust Jeudy until he starts posting more consistent numbers on the field. And I don't really like the matchup against the Raiders because I think they might run the ball more. Denver might run the ball more in this game because they're not good against the run at all. And the Vegas Raiders allow the 8th fewest fantasy points to receivers also. So yeah. I'm steering clear of Jeudy in this matchup. All right, Logan, let's move on to sleeper at receiver. What's your sleeper for week 4 at receiver?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Richie James from New York Jets or Giants. So Sterling Shepard got an injury last week for the Giants. You probably saw that on the Monday Night Football game. It was a pretty gruesome injury for his ACL. But Richie James almost jumps up to be this #1 wide receiver role with the Giants. I mean, you look at the wide receiver core, it's kind of similar to the Bears, and they don't really have that clear-cut #1 with Shepard gone. You got Kenny Golladay, who had several missed drops. You got Kadarius Toney, who has kind of been inactive with an injury as well. So they're mainly going to rely on Richie James, I believe, in that wide receiver role. So I like him as my sleeper. He's available in so many leagues on RT Sports. So go take advantage of him if you have a little iffy on your wide receiver and you need to take a boomer bust play. I like Richie James.
I really like that James call. He's the last man standing basically this week. And he's gotten the looks even with those other guys.
Yeah, even before Shepard was hurt, he was getting some looks.
I think he's set up for good things. My sleeper is Alec Pierce, the rookie out of Indianapolis. Had his best game as a pro last week, caught 3 passes for 61 yards on 5 targets, and he played just 45% of the snaps. So he got a lot of targets when he was on the field. I think he's going to play more going forward. Paris Campbell's played a ton this year, but he's done next to nothing. So I think Pierce is going to start getting more involved in the offense. And I really like him as a red zone target, too. He's a big receiver, good in the red zone at shielding defenders. And he plays Tennessee this week. They've allowed 8 passing touchdowns. So I think this could be a situation where Pierce finds the end zone in week 4 I like him as my sleeper at receiver. Let's move on to tight end. A little better the last couple weeks this position. So hopefully it keeps trending upwards. Who's your start for this week, Logan?
Yeah, bounce back. He actually had a down week. His first 2 weeks were good, but Darren Waller is going to be my start for wide or tight end. If you have a tight end league, you're most likely going to be starting Waller if you have him on your roster. But there's some leagues that have wide receiver / tight end combo, and I like still starting Darren Waller in that league. He's getting so many end zone targets so far. So from Derek Carr, he's kind of been taking away some looks from Davante Adams as well. But last week they just pounded Darren Waller with targets in the end zone. I believe he had 2 or 3 targets in the end zone. His past couple of games have been a little iffy. I mean, he's 6, 8, and 5 with targets so far. But what I love about him is the end zone targets that he's been receiving. So I expect him to find the end zone again this year or this week.
All right, I like David Njoku. He had a huge game last week. It would have been better if I said this last week. But I like him this week as well. Caught 9 passes for 89 yards and a touchdown on 10 targets. But I think this has kind of been building. He had 5 targets the previous game, and he's becoming a favorite target of Jacoby Brissette outside of Amari Cooper. So I think he's going to start getting a lot of looks going forward. He showed his potential last week, and he plays a Falcons team, like you mentioned earlier, Logan, that we think this could be a high-scoring game. Atlanta allows the second most fantasy points to tight ends. They're 27th against the pass. So I think the Browns are going to have success throwing the ball, and Njoku is going to be a part of that in week 4. Let's move on to our sits now, Logan. Who are you sitting at tight end?
Yeah, I'm going to be sitting Gerald Everett. So he became a really popular play after week 1, especially with the Keenan Allen injury. So he's picked up in a lot of leagues, started weeks 2 and 3 in most of those leagues. But with Keenan Allen on the return, also Justin Herbert's a little bit banged up with his rib injury. I like sitting Gerald Everett back again. He's a fine stash on your bench, but I would not feel super comfortable starting him. He only had 2 receptions last week for 25 yards, 4.5 fantasy points. So I think there are much better options to go with this week with Gerald Everett, as he kind of relies on Keenan Allen being out of his lineup with those targets.
All right, my sit is Tyler Higbee with the Rams. I'm picking on the Rams. I said Matthew Stafford as well, but Higbee's had a fine season to date, but he had a season low in targets last week, which is 4. 49ers allow the fewest fantasy points to tight ends this season. I still think Higbee can be boom or bust in this offense. They got to get Allen Robinson involved more, in my opinion. So I think that might happen this week, and that's going to make Higbee's targets suffer a little bit. So if you have better options to go with in week 4, I would consider sitting Tyler Higbee. All right, let's do a sleeper at tight end. Logan, who's your sleeper?
Yeah, my sleeper this week is Evan Ingram. So this is a crazy stat that I found. So in 2016 on Ole Miss, Evan Ingram, their wide receiver core was Van Jefferson, DK Metcalf, and AJ Brown. Evan Ingram actually led that wide receiver core in reception or yardage at Ole Miss. So that's pretty crazy that he had more yardage than AJ Brown and DK Metcalf, and then also Van Jefferson. So that's a very good wide receiver core. Evan Ingram's tied for 4th so far in the NFL and tight end routes ran so far this year. So absolutely love that. He's ran over 90 routes. So he's getting out there. We just need to get Lawrence to look his way with those routes that he's running. But I like him as my sleeper candidate this week at the tight end spot.
Yeah, and you mentioned they could be playing from behind in that game, having to throw the ball more, so game script could lead to more targets. My sleeper is Will Dissly, the Seattle Seahawks tight end. Touchdowns 2 or 3 games, 12-plus fantasy points, 2 of those games as well. It's a shallow position. I know Dissly's kind of a touchdown-dependent play in my view because he doesn't get a ton of catches, but he's had multiple catches every game, just not huge yardage totals. He's actually out-snapping Noah Fant right now as well at tight end, so he's the tight end to use in that offense in Seattle. And as we mentioned earlier, I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. Lions allow 30-plus points per game for the season. So I think Dissly could find the end zone once again. Again, kind of a boom or bust play, but I think he's worth taking a chance on if you're looking for a tight end for week 4. All right, Logan, that's our start, sits, and sleepers for week 4. Thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jeff. Enjoyed it.
Should be a fun week of fantasy football again. Lots of good games on the slate. As we mentioned, an early game on Sunday as well in London. So we have football around the clock this week. Should be a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
All right, Logan. Thanks again for joining me. This has been Jeff Paur for RealTime Fantasy Sports.
And this has been Logan Glaser from RealTime Fantasy Sports.
Good luck in week 4, everybody.